that's going to bring us back to Oakland because she's been talking to what's going on in the AB5 protest, what's been happening in that industry, because this is a developing situation, and we have to kick the show off with this one.
That's right. So Clarissa, how are you? Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on today.
So what exactly are we seeing? I guess let's start off right there. We're at the ports in Oakland, the AB5 situation, they're protesting out there. What exactly might we be seeing right now?
Well, it's really early in California, so I'm not sure if any of the protesters are there yet. I had talked to some last night, and they were going to meet early this morning and discuss kind of their plan and their strategy for today if they were going to continue, because the port has made it very clear that they were going to implement, different strategies to prevent them from blocking any port operations today. And so they were going to gauge, they've been kind of communicating all over the weekend, but they're going to just see how many still want to continue. And some also say they are talking about taking the fight to Sacramento and, and talking to Governor Newsom, or trying to get their voices heard there, maybe to have more of an impact, on how this is. Since he won't come to Oakland, maybe they'll go to him. So it's all kind of up in the air. Today.
From what I understand, Clarissa, this is maybe a new way of doing things down in Oakland, the way that they are setting things up and, moving things aside to allow for protests. You kind of had talked about maybe some strategy points. Did they mention anything specifically to you?
Well, on late Thursday, the Port of Oakland was setting up barricades so that they couldn't block any. They were setting up these free speech zones and protest areas where they could stay. But if they brought any vehicle like their truck, or if they stepped outside that zone, they were going to be cited and possibly arrested. But the protest, this is from what I've heard from people that have been there 40 some years. That protest last week was the longest one. Like a 5-day one was the longest one they've ever had at the Port of Oakland. So, they felt like that was a small victory. But then some of, even some of the trade associations were like, we support the port drivers. And then, on Friday, we're saying, hey, it was a great sign of solidarity, but we need the port to resume operations because, customers, you need their containers or on the ship or off the ship. So it was interesting to watch because they all came together over this issue that may put them out of business.
And Clarissa, you mentioned Governor Newsom a little bit earlier. He also has a relationship with former Mayor Willie Brown of San Francisco. What can you tell us about that, and what does it mean?
Well, Willie Brown he was the former state assemblyman, and he was Governor Newsom's mentor several years ago. And so Willie Brown had written an article for the San Francisco Chronicle for 12 years, and it ran every Sunday. But when AB5 took effect, while the truckers, they had the legal challenge, they were going forward with the other industries that were independent contractor agreements. And so, he was notified by the Chronicle editor that he had reached his 35 article maximum and he wasn't going to be allowed to publish. So the Politico did a great article and he took it back to, Governor Newsom and said, hey, AB5 is affecting me. What can we do? Because I've written this column every year, every Sunday for 12 years. And so they passed, it was another assembly bill that they introduced, and it passed very quickly. And the goal was aimed at, to allow Willie Brown to continue to write his column. So the Politico, Brown sent his text messages to the reporter that worked on that piece and said, I pass I passed the bill, go write your damn column, kind of. And so, it was like the truckers don't understand how a whole industry, like 70,000, drivers, owner operators, independent contractors could be wiped out, in the next few months that are critical to the supply chain. And, those containers can get moved without them, but they still aren't getting, a special assembly bill for them. And so it was very frustrating.
It's really interesting to bring that up, just talking about, trying to get this information out there and specifically talking about this so that everybody knows what's really happening and being allowed to put this information out there. You talked about moving a protest maybe to Sacramento. Any other word on if that might happen, if you are positive that they're going to be moving things that way?
A lot of people that have been working behind the scenes. I mean, some of these port drivers were up to $1,200 a day that they weren't making any money by staying out. And a lot of them, the fear of arrest is real. And we saw different, even when I was out there, for the most part, the highway patrol, the port, they were very good the first few days, but as it wore on, there's been more kind of pushback from, the CHP and everything. So they've made it very clear that you step out of line. They sent this letter, and it was kind of like a legal, once they took possession of it, it was kind of like a legal document showing them this is what we expect on coming Monday, and if you don't comply, these are the consequences. And so these are family, that support their families. They don't want, to be arrested. They don't want to cause any kind of, unruly behavior, but to put them in a certain area and stand but yet block, in certain areas, but they can't step outside and do the, blocking of the trucks, through the gates. That's, they don't know what kind of impact that will have, since the trucks will be allowed in and out. And then too, we don't know really if I heard that they're going to be, very strict, today, that the port's kind of over, they were okay the first 2 days, and then now it basically shut down port movement. So it's like, okay, you had your fun, which is not really, you don't consider that fun, but now it's time to get back to work. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I had some drivers that said that they were going to call me later this morning once they got a sense of what everybody wanted to do, because they definitely didn't want to force anybody to do something and then them possibly get arrested, and that's not good for anybody.
Larissa, I'm curious, talking to these drivers, talking to the folks that you're catching up with during these protests, what do you think they are feeling? I want to know what the environment might feel like out there right now.
Basically, it's panic. It's what do I do next? I don't want to work for a company. While they could go through the steps and they have their own equipment but a lot of them keeps going back to like the safety issue. If, because a lot of them do work, like under the, where they have someone that helps, they get to pick and choose what loads they want to take. I had some that say, I only do night port work. I do early mornings, and under this, they will have to work with a broker, and find the loads and also drive, if they're independent, drivers, they'll have to do all of this while they're in line, waiting at the port, unless they have, a family member that can also help them do this. So they're like, how am I going to be on the phone with brokers and looking at, boards and things when I'm supposed to be, when I drive, I love to drive. And so it's that unknown, a lot of them don't like paperwork, they want to drive and they know how to do that best. And so to learn, kind of all of that goes into it, there's that, unknown for them as well.
And
And they
Clarissa,
don't really want to do any. They love their community. Like the Bay Area, the port truckers. They have their own unique community, and they don't want to leave and do something else.
and Clarissa, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, we're looking at someone that's really kind of gotten into their schedule. This is their way of life. I can only imagine this kind of disruption that this will bring upon them. Is there any talks right now of this kind of moving drivers out of state, out of the industry, or really any of these protests getting out of the state altogether?
There's been talk that some drivers, they say they know how much they need per week to run, and how many loads they need. And if they don't get that, and have to go to an hourly system, they're talking about if they pay me a certain wage or whatever a week, if the company doesn't have enough loads or enough freight, are they just going to cut, back my hours that I need to make sure that I, pay my expenses and everything. So some have been talking about if this happens, I'm just gonna close this down and move. I can't afford to live in California if they put me on a hourly pay system, and a lot of them don't want to do long haul. The reason they pick the port is that port work is that they could be home with their families every night. So the potential is like 70% of the freight that's moved at the Port of Oakland is through owner operators. And I mean, there are several big companies, that definitely, from the Central Valley that do ag work, export work at the Port of Oakland. But for the most part, they depend on these owner operators to do all the port work.
So much for joining us this morning. We're going to be running out of time in just a moment, so we'll be checking back in with you this week, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens this morning. Thank you so much.
Me on.